Oh, we're live.
Who have you been?
Oh, the thing is, when you go live like this, it won't use the event that you've created before. You're muted.
So what are we seeing?
Does it matter?
There are 20 people waiting now, so I'll try and delete that event. But everyone can hear us now. Hello, everyone. Oh, the thing is, when you go live like this, you're muted.
We all set?
Yeah. All good.
We all set?
Ooh, sorry. Wait, hang on. Oh. Videos. Live. All good. Ooh, sorry. Hang on. All good.
Okay, good evening, everyone that is streaming in today. On behalf of Pastor Jonathan Mock, our Senior Minister and our leadership team, I'd just like to welcome you to Wealth with a Purpose and Money Week. And this is our session 1. Before we go introduce the speaker to you, I just want some housekeeping around the Q&A. So after this session, the talk, we will have a Q&A session via the Zoom room. We will still be streaming live for those who just want to watch. For those who have questions, yes, you can join us in the Zoom room, which is iccbrisbane.org/Zoom. In terms of questions, while we are live streaming, feel free to drop in the questions on the live stream, and we will collate them and try to answer as many of them as we can during the Q&A. Okay. All right. Another thing that I wanted to bring up, a few months ago, we held a session on budgeting, basic budgeting, on a seminar, and we have that recorded. So for any of you who want that, please feel free to contact me, and I can send that link to you. Okay, I'll introduce Roger Head to us. Thank you, Roger, for taking the time to come and share with us your insights and thoughts around the opportunities that we see coming in and out of this isolation. So Roger comes from an interesting background. He's a child of missionaries in PNG, so he spent many years in PNG. He still ministers to many leaders in PNG. He has a background in applied finance, which gives him the authority to speak to us today on the economic situation. He spent many years with various businesses, turning them around, helping them. He's successfully had his own business, which he recently sold off. He also was equivalent to like a chief operating officer of Paradise Church in Adelaide, which is a large church over there. Right now, he has moved on into just church consulting. He sits on the board of many churches across Australia as co-chair, as CFO, as COO. And he's also provided some advice, invaluable advice to us at ICC in terms of structure and legal. Roger is a very humble man, I must say. Even when I asked him to send me his biodata, he was so sheepish about it. But that's who he is. So I think I'll just say a short prayer before I hand it over to Roger. I hope that each one of you are blessed today and be open to what is being taught, and hopefully you can glean something and use money wisely. Father, we just thank you, Lord God, for this time that we can come before, Lord God, this seminar, and just to share thoughts and insights, Lord. Father, I pray, Lord God, for each one present. I pray, Lord God, the Holy Spirit will work in them, Lord God. Open our ears to hear, Lord God, what you want to speak to us, of how we can be wise stewards of what you have given us, Lord God, and how we can be a blessing to people around us, Lord God, even in these hard times, Lord God. Thank you for everything, Lord God, and we praise your name, Lord God. In Jesus' name, amen. Roger, over to you.
Amen. Thank you for the introductions. Great to be here with everyone tonight. We're at a fair way away from each other, but digital technology brings us all together. But it also means you can grab your coffee and sit down on your couch. And I'm looking forward to a really good night tonight. It's an important night. What we're going to talk about and cover will be very relevant to all of us. We're all tracking in this together, and that's as a world as well. So as we get started and as we talk to this space, the group is an interesting mixed group. So we've had some feedback of coming into this session. So we've got some business owners, we've got employers, employees, students, mums and dads. So it's a broad section of the community. So that gives us the opportunity to cover things, and there'll be something in it for everyone as we go along. So just keep in mind that some of the topics you might not see relevant, but I ask you to keep an open mind and really lean in and see how it can join. And I'll be explaining how everything sort of joins together and we need to be aware across it. So thanks, Pastor Jonathan and Brian. The Q&A at the end, you can have a think of as we go, because this isn't so interactive this way. At the end of the night, in about an hour and a half or so, a bit less, we'll have some questions that you can put together, and Brian will collate that, as he said, as we go along. Actually, can I put in a question myself, and someone that's cooking or something can answer that for me? Everywhere I go at the moment, there's lamingtons. Now, this will become important later on, but, well, important for me anyway. Can someone answer why we're short on toilet paper, but there's lamingtons everywhere? It's a very interesting economic situation we find ourselves in, but there's an oversupply of lamingtons. Is that just a South Australian thing? Maybe it's a Brisbane thing. If someone can answer that, for me, that will be my question for tonight. And then you guys can throw all sorts of wonderful questions at me as we go along. So something for everyone, maybe not something for sport. If your religion is sport, tonight's not really for you. There is only one God, and his name isn't Wally Lewis. So I'm sorry for those people. I'm probably showing my age saying that, but a lot of us are missing out on sport at the moment, which is interesting. but that's the only sports analogy you'll get tonight. You'll have to find some other area of your interest to join in your world how this works for you. Otherwise, we cover a whole bunch of areas. I'm going to drop straight into it. So we're all going to go on a journey. We're going on a journey all together as a planet at the moment, and very much so we're going on a journey tonight. If we were hobbits, we're going on an adventure. And I think that's the mindset that we should see everything in all seriousness. We should have the mindset that the times that we're in is an adventure. We should realise that there's some sad side to what's going on, but there's a great opportunity to be salt and light. So we'll focus on economic things tonight, but we need to have a mindset of can do and not disappearing into the background, which is easy to do in isolation if we're sitting in our houses and not getting out. But we'll talk about how we can influence even in isolation and after isolation. Some of you might be zooming in tonight or connecting with devices that are telephones, mobile phones. This screen may appear very small and you'll see a couple of pixels moving in the top right corner, which is probably me. So don't worry about that. I'll be talking to some of the slides we go through. So no issues with that. Don't be concerned if you're seeing something that's tiny, like myself in the corner being a hobbit. It's about understanding the concepts that we go. And if you just can pray for an open heart, keep in prayers for each other. Feel free, if you're comfortable, to lean into the screen if you're not in a video mode. So, raise your hand to the screen and ask God for a word in season in this time as we go through in economics. A word for our friends that we might just see on Zoom meetings and at church, and a word for our neighbours. It's very important to have a now word from God in this time and not rely on words that have served us very well in the past. And I'll show you that from an economic reason, that God has blessed us in the past. Absolutely. You'll hear more from the speaker tomorrow on some of the things we're covering off. Don't see anything as overlap in this time. Just see maybe God's trying to twig something in your mind for confirmation about what's happening in your life. So take it on board as we go along. All right, so while we're talking about opportunity, I need to just start with a bit of perspective. So this is a screenshot. If you guys can see this at the moment, just as we start the slideshow, I'm assuming that everything's on board. Let me know if there's some technical issue we go through for the guys running. But this is a shot from Punjab in India across to the Himalayas. This shot could not have been taken and wouldn't have looked like this for the last 30 years. There was no way of seeing anything from where this picture is taken. So it's important to realise while we're sitting in our worlds in home that there are some upsides to this straight away, and we'll go through a number of upsides. And that's not to belittle the struggles, and also not to not thank the heroes and the surgeons and the doctors and the nurses and everything that's going on in that world. But let's just have some perspective in our own lives and realise we're at a point in a journey that a number of us have not seen before, both as economists and also in our own world. So this is affecting everyone, personal, business, everything. So I just wanted to start with an outside shot, a shot that the air is cleaning up so that this shot could happen. You might be wondering why I'm showing the Hubble Space Telescope at the moment. Because I want to get perspective, as I said, and I want to go from a world position, because everything that's happening in your home at the moment has a global impact to it. There is a global component that I'll need to go through economically as we drill down on these points. So we head towards our personal worlds, but even as we do that, the global world at the moment is impacting on us. It's obvious, but let's have a look from an economic point of view. So we'll start off with macro and have a look at some global impacts. Again, I'm not asking you to be able to see this slide. It's not important to be able to see the details of this, but it's just, you might see the trends on here, that what it's looking at is daily new cases. And we won't spend a lot of time on the coronavirus itself. We'll be talking about the impacts of it, but I'll just cover off enough of the stats. It's on the news every night. And if you really want to dig down into this, you can go online, but I'm sure we've had too much overload in this. So I want to relate this back. Some of us are starting to come out of lockdown but it's important to understand that the world is still having its highest days of daily new cases. So if you look at this point, and by the way, just to understand stats, it does go up and down a bit, but that's because these low points are Sunday. Now, that's not because people don't die on Sunday. It's because data isn't entered into the following Monday in a lot of places. So it's an administration point, but you can see the trend. Back in January, we might have heard December, January, some stories starting to come out, maybe of an isolated situation. But basically now we're in a point that we're all very aware of this, and we're moving to a point that we in Australia, because of actions taken, are allowing us to move out of isolation. But the world is still reaching its high marks. It's just come off just now, another new high of daily deaths. So keep that in mind and have a prayer for the rest of the regions, because it's easy to think about our own world. So even with perspective, it helps to understand what others are going through. With daily deaths, that's starting to come down. So we've got two charts at the moment where we've got daily new cases coming in, reading high mark, but the daily death point, just to be clear, is starting to drop off as a trend. Again, the low points are the Sunday service, not Sunday service, the Sundays where data isn't being entered. So that's encouraging, but it's probably too soon to say that that's actually an ongoing trend. There's some places in the world that are only starting to move into their pandemic situation. Let's drop now straight into the economic space, but I just wanted to give some perspective to that as we go through. Okay, so the IMF at the moment, that's the International Monetary Fund. They've been talking about this as the Great Lockdown. They're trying to get a handle of this. You remember that in January, we just came out of the Davos concert, or the Davos conference, economic meetings. For those that aren't aware and aren't in the financial services sector, that's fine. You might remember it from the point of view of Greta being there, and Greta and Trump having a discussion, the President of America, about the impact of capitalism and consumerism, and talking about responsible capitalism. That's now been put on the back burner with everything that's happened. So it's interesting to see what happened as a result of this. But that was only January. They were looking forward. Don't go out means not consuming. And that's a significant issue for the economy. It goes without saying. They're talking about the great reversal. So in 2020, we have about 160 countries that were going to be in positive income growth. And now there's about 170 countries. Now, depending on how you read the world, there's about 200 odd countries, depending on how you measure things. But there's 170 countries with negative income per capita growth now as the projection. So there's a total reversal. There's a big deal going on. There's an increase in uncertainty, and that means there's a lot of modelling going on. My world back a couple of months ago was doing a whole lot of modelling, a whole lot of sorry, just one second. A whole lot of modelling, a whole lot of forecasting to try to figure out how to get a handle of this. So there were some interesting times because the word unprecedented got thrown around a fair bit. I would go so far as to say unprecedented in perhaps modern times, and remember, as I go through this, keep a mind out of how this relates to you, because we'll drop right into that very soon, but it's important to understand the scope. The IMF is hoping for the great transformation, make the world a better place. Now, that's probably pretty optimistic, but that's how they're talking at the moment. Okay, so still on macro, there was a couple of big trends. Many countries responded with economic stimulus. There's been about $9 trillion pledged or spent so far. That's probably spent, and more money being thrown at it to come. So there was a lot of action taken in the early stages, but there's more to come, and we'll go into that in a minute. Many countries responded with social distancing measures. That's the testing and the isolation. Some countries focused on the health of their people, Some countries focus on the economic impact of their people, so that there's two different worlds going on and two different structures. Inside those structures, you have maybe somewhere like New Zealand that's taken an extra step than what we did. So New Zealand went to the equivalent of, let's say, a level 4 lockdown. And there's other places that haven't locked down at all, or only have locked down recently, or the lockdown was, you know, piecemeal, bits and pieces, or slow to it. I mean, there's lots of examples of the UK, the US, the whole world's doing their own thing of how they're responding. Australia responded very quickly, and he's one of the early adopters of isolation. Again, it looked different in each country. But spare a thought for how this works, because there's a physical health issue and there's a financial health issue, both run each other in the short term. In the longer term, I think there's some good correlations. In the shorter term, those countries that have turned off and gone into isolation have had a massive financial hit. And the other countries are initially doing better, but I wouldn't read too much into that. I've just got a couple more slides just on the chatty side, so where we'll get into some examples soon. But just to finish the large macroeconomic world, it's important to understand that to stimulate the economy, generally that means printing money. So in this case, the modern version of printing money is a little different than what the Great Depression might look like, and it's important to understand the subtleties. But basically, there's been a lot of bonds issued, but bonds ultimately mean more debt. Now, there's only so far you can go with this, and you can push out the time that this works with lower interest rates. Now, lower interest rates were already upon us when this happened, so that's a pretty big deal as well. We're coming into this already on low interest rates. In our world, we talk about what's called the Minsky moment. So if you've got some history buffs in your, I was going to say in the room, but in your own room, you can do this as a breakout, a bit of homework. You can have a look at the Minsky moment. Basically, it's talking about how much headroom economically you have, how much extra cash you have that you can throw at the economy if you have to make decisions. This only works so long because you reach a point that you'll derail the economy if you keep supporting it because you run out of your own funds. This can happen in heaps of ways. I won't go into deflation and anything in such detail. Happy to take it in question time though, but you might remember pictures in the Great Depression of people running around with wheelbarrows full of money. It was that sort of position. I'm sure that there was some context to that, but this is slightly different. But we have to keep in mind our economic understanding that we can't keep staying in isolation as a country because it depends on how much wealth we have as a country. Some countries have very little buffer so that they can't isolate everyone because then the economy stops. So largely in Australia, we're talking about various versions of first world issues. And I know that that's a bit shocking to say when we've had 103 deaths now, but I'll show you what this can look like when you don't have that economic stability. GFC in 2008 came close to breaking the economic system. A lot of measures came out of that which are known as Basel. That's where they were done, but it's become the Basel measures, different steps, Basel 1, 2, 3. It's talking about how the banks are actually supported. So in Australia, if you have money with the bank as an example, that are going to underwrite that to 250,000. The too big to fail concept, give strength to banks to keep reserves. All of that came into play. However, we had to learn, business owners, employees, employers, everyone else, how to remap our businesses. Now, hopefully we learned in that time. I used to talk with my friend in the commerce world a couple of years ago, and we started saying, what if these were the good old days? What if, a couple of years ago when I was saying this, what if they were the good old days? And have we mapped our businesses around to the point that 2 years ago, could we say that we were thriving? Now, it's possible that a lot of say, but it may be true that they were the good old days. There's some bigger trends at play. You'll see that tonight and maybe again tomorrow. It's important to come in tomorrow as well, by the way. Make your time available so you can do that. So in remapping this, it's important to understand the season. I don't know whether you've understood the men of Issachar analogy. So the men of Issachar, so this is 1 Chronicles 12:32. This is about understanding the times and what to do, because the men of Issachar were known as people that understood the times and they knew what to do. This is about a now word of God that we need to understand at the moment. The now word of God, it is very important. A rhema word you might have heard about. It's talking about hearing from God now. We don't want to come out of this session, even tonight, with good ideas. It might be great to have good ideas, but we actually need God ideas. We need to know which parts of those to implement in our own lives, in our own finances, in our own jobs, what to do next, how to restructure. So if you're going to take notes tonight, which you don't have to, you can chill back and have your coffee while I'm not. I might have a glass of water as I go. It's important to understand a now word for God. So we have to be silent, get ourselves in a spot and seek God so we can hear from God. And that will allow us to have a word in season for ourselves specifically. So the IMF is saying that they're praying too, which is interesting. I think it's just a hyperbole, that they're praying that the crisis can build resilience and all this sort of thing. But I think we should take it as a warning. Some of us are actually not doing badly out of this. It's like a tale of two cities. There's those that are doing very difficult and those that are actually doing well in this time for whatever reason, or a particular sector or whatever. So there's those people out there. But even those people that might think are doing well now, please take the hint. God might start, and I'm not saying this is God, please don't understand the philosophies here, but God in our own lives sometimes starts with a quiet tap on the shoulder. That might build to a friend talking to us, but God in his love will move up to a sledgehammer and hit us around the head, not physically obviously, to try to get the point across as a warning so that we can be available to hear him. Let us hear God at the quiet tap. That's the best time to hear God. So maybe take this as a warning, even if you're doing well, that maybe too much business and personal debt, maybe living beyond our means, maybe we see keeping up with the Joneses, that they're doing all right, but maybe it's not all right. Maybe we're pushing the envelope. Maybe it's a thin veneer that we're doing okay, but behind that, we've got lots of debts. And I'm sensitive because there are lots of people in that boat right now, I understand, but I'm talking particularly to the people that are doing well and think that they are bulletproof. I would still heed the warning and take a considerable look at your businesses, those that are in business that are watching tonight, and think about stronger buffers, think about stronger fundamentals. There was a time to do this a couple of years ago. The prophetic word on the street, if you like, was to drop debt. And a number of people heard that, and a number of ministries and churches heard that. If you're directly involved in churches, equally applied there. And so churches moved on that, a lot of churches that I'm involved in, and ICC is a great church for you to be involved in, and I love dropping in and visiting when I'm up that way. So people hearing, but maybe now there's another opportunity. So please hear now if you haven't heard already. Reassess your businesses. Great chance to stop, recommit our businesses and our skills and our gifts back to God. That's where all this comes from. Refocus on God as CEO and Lord of our lives and our families and our future. God was not surprised when any of this happened. Just remember that. His promises are still true. It's not like God thought, oh, wow, where did that come from? Oh, I have to readjust my personal promises to you. That's not the case. God is all-knowing. He's all aware. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to prosper you. Jeremiah 29:11. There's a good breakout verse for you to look up at some stage. Sorry for the slight pauses as I go through this. I'm just waiting for slides loading. Now, as important as these economic points are, they're largely first world issues about chances to look at your businesses, what you do, maybe retool your own life, reskill, and we'll look at that in a minute. But spare a thought for poorer countries. The choice there is to let people die of COVID or die of starvation in some cases. Because if they go into isolation, the economy stops and there's no food. These are serious issues. When we went into isolation, chances are you still had food or access to food. Some of you are doing it tight. The church is there also to work in with you. Please contact the church and if you're in that point. But by and large, we still have food in our fridges and businesses open. Sometimes we had businesses open, I mean, places to shop to get food. Now there were shortfalls and things like that, but bear in mind for some countries that it's tough. It's super tough. And we haven't even seen some of what tough looks like. Unfortunately, you need to be aware of that for some countries. Partner with the countries around us. If you're the sort of person that works in government or wherever you're coming from tonight, if you have an opportunity to talk with other countries, to work with them to help, it's important to work on that because we're all in this together. Here's a quick shot. If you thought you were poor, and we tend to say that in our voices, please watch your soundbite, what you're saying this time, because it's important to understand we don't want to declare a poverty mentality. I don't want to take this concept too far, but if you can see this on the side here, that's taking the whole world, splitting it up into fifths. The top fifth, top 20% of the world, and you might have seen this. Now, this is slightly out of date. This is 2008 slide, but it shows the purpose when this was done. This is called the champagne glass distribution of wealth. This says, in this case, it's over 80%. So don't worry about the exact figures now. It's not relevant now, but the shape is still the same. The top 80% of the wealth across the world is with the top 20% of people. In fact, with the top 40%, you're over 90%. So just bear in mind what other countries are going through. Keep them in your prayers, but also maybe if you can, be active in that space. As we move out of macro, we're just looking at individual countries now. And again, if you're on a phone, this is going to look pretty small, this pie chart. That's okay. What you're looking at here is different countries of the world. The US representing number of cases, nearly 30%. But have a look at Brazil. When I did this slide up last week, I just updated it tonight before the presentation. Brazil was not at 7%, it was barely on 6%. The number of cases are skyrocketing in Brazil. Keep an eye out for India as well. The reason for that, I'll go one more slide and come back to this. The reason for that, if we have a look at Brazil, you'll see down there on the left, again, tiny chart, but all it's showing is if you have a look at the wealth, the median wealth per adult, Brazil is number 100 on the list of countries. So it's well down, and it has an adult population over 150 million. So if we take a poor country, and by the way, I'm going to get some feedback by this, I understand, because normally when you see this figure, you see what's called GDP, and basically it's looking at the mean wealth. But there are some very rich people in Brazil, and then there's a gap. You can see that how that looks on this chart. So I'm aware if you're an economist sitting out there, you say, yes, Roger, but I'd rather have a look at the median wealth per adult in Brazil, and that will put it down at 100. And that's closer to the true situation that you'll find in the street in Brazil. And on the right side, you'll see the daily deaths, but you'll see it's only starting to get going in mid-March. So this is a situation that's still growing for Brazil. Brazil is at 25,000 deaths, so it's not turning up on some of the charts. Charts at the moment, and people in the news are talking about these sorts of charts. This chart is purely saying once you reach 100 deaths in your country, then it's going to look at the number of days since 100 deaths and plot the actual deaths on a chart. You'll see the US, so the United States has gone over 100,000 deaths. Now, again, in the media, and this isn't on logarithm, by the way, you might hear people talking about log to get an idea of the shapes of the graphs and things, and I take that point. But when we were looking at log back a few weeks ago in the spaces that I'm working in, there were people saying that in America, there were people saying that the US wouldn't go over 100,000. Now, for everything that we were looking at, we thought, and I'm on record as saying in other meetings, that that's unlikely. And unfortunately, I'd rather have been wrong in this case, but the US in the last couple of days has gone over 100 deaths. But you won't see Brazil on this chart. Let's pray Brazil doesn't get onto this chart. But it's early days for Brazil. India, same story, 115th world, nearly 1 billion people. And again, they're only picking up their first deaths on the counter towards COVID deaths at the end of March. So even later again, and that line's still going up. So please spare a prayer for India and everywhere else, and wherever you have connections. Okay, let's go now, have a look at a regional situation. So I'll start off pre-COVID. So let's have a look at the region that we're sitting in. Yes, we're on the map. So for those who are thinking, is he going to talk about the world all night? No, I'm not. And we'll have a break soon. It's okay. I will work in a break and have an ad break coming up. So hang with me just for another couple of minutes or so, and we'll go to an ad break. Okay, so this regional situation is Australia. At the bottom there, we all should understand where we are on this chart. So Australia, by and large, I'm oversimplifying this to make a point. We dig holes in the ground and we export those overseas. Then when we sell them overseas, they might be processed overseas, the raw materials, and we get dollars back for that raw commodity, iron ore, whatever it is. Then, if you look at economic progress, and again, I'm oversimplifying, you'll see that I've put in China an area of factories. That's a little dot for some on the phone. And beside that now I've moved to taking those materials, producing, let's say, steel, and then taking the steel and moving to a time in the economy where it's actually producing the end products. Those then end products are exported, obviously. No, not rocket science here tonight, but they are exported in various formats. And then the money comes back into China in this case as a regional discussion from other countries. And that amount of money is obviously larger than the money that, let's say, Australia gets from iron ore because it's unprocessed. Then, stage 3, if you like, we get to a point that the factories that are in place, the people working in the factories, the people working in the commodities, the exporting of the commodities are then moving to cities. And totally separate conversation, but the urbanization of China, if we look at that, has been massive. People have been moving into cities at this is where you can use unprecedented. History hasn't scoped the amount of people moving into cities before like China. And then pretty soon, you actually have an internal economy where there's enough money and enough purchasing power internally. So that's like stage 3 in an economy. Now, again, I know it's not rocket scientists, but you would think it was with the little action that's been taken around these points coming up. So we've just had the 13th National People's Congress in May, in fact, last week. And the economists and the coneheads and nerds like myself in the world sit back and wait for the GDP figure to come out, what China's GDP is going to be. And this year, there was no projection. There was none. COVID was impacted, COVID was cited as the impact. And there was a discussion at the same time. So there was a release that came out about the reorganisation from infrastructure-led growth to consumer-led growth and de-gearing. This is what was happening. This was going to happen anyway, just for stages of the economy. This is what normally happens. But with COVID hitting, and now tariffs hitting, we need to be mindful of that because that's going to affect you in your lounge room. I know that sounds weird, but I needed to start with the world because this is going to impact your world. A direct correlation even on this is that India on the side is retooling some of its factories to accept new structures that were in China from the US. So the US is looking at diversifying. diversifying is generally a great idea, but it's sort of come pretty late, regardless of COVID. But maybe COVID was a wake-up call that we, that provides some opportunities. If you looked at Bali, you may not have seen Bali in the news, but that's what our world is. India wasn't accepting Australian barley because of the pesticides we used. So there was an opportunity for Australia. It's now changed. India is now saying it's happy to accept the pesticides that we use here as an import product. So barley technically could be shipped into India. So I'm just showing how the world impacts. Now, I know we may not have on board the CEO of the Barley Corporation for Australia, etc., but this is, believe me, affecting your lounge room, and you need to be aware of it. I would like you to start reading change, not with fear, but with opportunity. Bigger change, bigger opportunity. I need you to start correlating these thoughts. It's not a time to put our head in the sand. It's not a time while we might be worried, and there's certain people in my world, particularly the nicer people in your world, let's say, may be more impacted with this because they're people persons. And my wife is a classic example. She's a wonderful person. People person, three-dimensional character, wonderful person. This time is more impacting from her than it is for someone like me, who's a bit more two-dimensional. So the nicer people in the world, be aware that people are struggling, but please, as much as you can, even if it's homework, and I don't mean to be insensitive, but please start seeing changes that you haven't seen before as opportunities, as potential opportunities. Global impacts and opportunities now very much affecting our personal worlds, but also means that global changes are now personal opportunities. Understanding global trends are now very important. At least understand the trend for your sector. If you're involved in education sector, retail sector, wherever it is, at least start doing a little bit of homework. Sorry, lifetime learners, please. Let's dig into this and understand our sector. You will need to going forward. In the past, the sector worked for you. It's largely been the same. We've gone through a history over the last lifetime. I'm 44 years old. My lifetime in that time, yesterday economics really allowed for tomorrow economics with some subtle changes. Tomorrow was it's yesterday. Today, tomorrow didn't matter much. We're now at a time that tomorrow will look very different than today. I'm sorry to say, but we will have to accept that. There are some things that will stay the same, but there'll be a lot of differences, and we need to be aware of them in our workplace. It's no longer enough to say, I live in Newmarket, or I work in Brisbane, or even my customers and clients come from Queensland. You are a global citizen. You're impacted by the world, and you can impact it. Don't feel impacted. You can impact it. If you don't understand this or choose to ignore it coming out of ISO, opportunities will pass you by, important opportunities. Be aware that while we're sitting in ISO, it's likely people will look back at this time and declare it the start of the Asian century. Some people have said it's already started. Some, I won't go into the data, but the graph I'm looking at there has Asia against the rest of the world as a function of GDP. And price purchasing power. Price purchasing power is what I like to call the Big Mac factor you might have heard about. What does it actually cost? How much money locally do I need to buy a Big Mac in each country? It's actually different. Your price purchasing power varies. So that's been taken care of in this graph, and it shows a crossover about now-ish, or others will say in about 4 years' times-ish. But that's on the backdrop of Asia as a whole being not as wealthy as the rest of the world. The blue line at the bottom there is the wealth of Asia, but it's starting to catch up. And in fact, this chart would actually indicate it may, before COVID happened, happen in 2030. Meanwhile, a lot of Asian countries are coming up the board. So China overtaking the US, India moving up to third space. You see Indonesia going up there, Thailand exactly the same. This chart basically just says what I was saying about the changeover from China on its own, becoming the largest economy in the world. It is by one or two measures at the moment. By some other measures, it's not there yet, but it's likely to occur very soon. And in fact, COVID might accelerate this. Acceleration is going to become a key word. All right, we bring this stage of the presentation to an end as we look at the macro side. And even though the IMF is indicating that we're likely to have a V-shaped recovery, like we go down and come back up in a V shape, I'm actually showing it here as a U-shaped recovery. There will be those parts of the world that have a V-shaped recovery, but by and large, the world is likely to have a U-shaped recovery to my estimates, but that still represents an opportunity, because innovation in times of change takes the path of least resistance. Innovation will accelerate this time. So what was 5 years is going to drop maybe back to 6 months. There's all sorts of things coming out of this. Let me just finish for those that are prophetic. Some people are in the room now and you're not economists. I understand. You may not be in business, but you may be a praying mum and dad. So this is the last thought just for this section at our break point. And I've just put Pope Urban VIII, and you're thinking, why am I talking about Pope Urban VIII in 1623? And the reason for that is Pope Urban got into a lot of debt, largely through a lot of military spending and the arts. He pulled down a lot of historic structures, politically and physically. His rule involved a focus on the conquest and occupation of nations. Nepotism, his own family coming to position, was also a big problem, and eventually resulted in a failed coup and an assassination attempt. This was going back in 1623. Now, I'm not correlating anything directly, but those prophetic people are amongst us. It's important to understand this and start getting some context out of this. So do some own research into Pope Urban as I leave this point now, and we flip out of this world at this point, and we'll go to the equivalent of an ad break. I'm happy, Brian, if you wanted to drop in at this point and chat. Otherwise, I've got a couple of things I can chat to. So I'll hand back over to Brian for a second as you can re-update your coffees, etc.
Hi, thanks, Roger. It's a good macro perspective on what's going on in the world. And I think the next session is where it will be more practical in terms of our day-to-day impact on our lives. So I'm happy, Roger, for you to make any comments and continue if you want, or if you need a break, we can stop for a while.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to do an ad break even while everyone's moving around. So if you're out and about at the moment and you're grabbing a coffee, for those that are staying put for a second, just a quick comment is have a think about your hobbies in isolation, how that relates to economics. You might find that when you're not at your work, you can find a quiet place. That's maybe when God talks to you and gives you a God idea about what to do with your money. It might be that you're thinking about something entirely different. I like to work outside on a car I'm doing up. I've got a 1972 Buick, and that's my world. And if I'm working on that, all of a sudden I'll have an idea that relates to my other world. So please spend some time with your hobbies in this time, stay positive, and think about how that's going to impact your world and listen out for God's voice.
And for those who are having questions, just feel free to post them up and I'll collate them. Roger, we got an answer for your Lamingtons question.
Oh, excellent.
Lamingtons are an Aussie national dish. Some organizations are fundraising using Lamington drives. So therefore the oversupply.
Okay. I wasn't enough connected in that space by the looks of it. So my world was just turning at Lamingtons everywhere, and I wasn't sure why. So thank you very much, whoever did that research. It's good to know. I haven't eaten any, I've got them here, but please, if you've got them in your house, grab a Lamington. Hopefully everyone's now updated their coffees, and okay, we'll get into things. Okay, so contrasting as we go into Australis, I know I spelt that wrong, but it's deliberate. In 1606, flip side of the prophetic side, so this is 15 years before 1623 or so. It was at Pentecost, and Pentecost is coming up for those that are aware on Sunday, but Pentecost that year was the 14th of May, 1606. Why am I saying this? Because there was a declaration over Australia, and you should grab this and seize this declaration by the Portuguese navigator. He was the captain of the boat there, and he said that this was the great south land of the Holy Spirit. You might have heard that before. That's where that came from, because Terra Australis del Spirito Santo, I'm rubbish at this translation, I'm sorry, but Australis was then picked up as the term, which is now Australia, back in 1606, and it was out of declaration of what God was doing. And if we focus on God's plan in this time, we won't be caught off guard. Even if we don't know that COVID is coming, we'll be taken care of and looked after. And let's lean into God in this time. Remember, God's plans is to prosper us in Jeremiah. But we are blessed, because remember, we're number 2 on that country list. We're blessed to be a blessing. So the very first thing of practical application is to think, I am blessed. I need God. I know it's tough, but what about my neighbour? And who is my neighbour? Totally different breakout meeting, but think about that as your first point of application tonight. If you haven't already got a few out of that other set, application is think of your neighbour. Think about being a blessing. Do you know your neighbours? Maybe knocking on their door is breaking isolation. So drop something on their footstep if you like. For those that it's safe, it's not safe for others to do this, of course, but here's some ideas. Maybe it's safe for you to know your neighbour and ask how they're doing. Okay, so Australia. Australia did the lockdown, obviously. That's where we're all sitting at the moment. So it did an isolation stage rollout. Basically, they were saying, they would never say this, but basically there's 2 sound bites in the world at the moment. The governments of the world are either saying to their individuals that we will hurt you economically, but you will likely live. Whereas other countries were almost saying, we won't hurt you economically, though some countries had economic space to do this, but they didn't go into isolation. We won't hurt you economically, but many of you will die. That is in essence what it comes down to. Now that's harsh, but that's what's now coming through in the stats. So we're coming out of isolation. What that looks like for us is like this now, where they're dropping right off. We actually had our 103rd death in Australia a couple of days ago. That was in Queensland, as you might be aware, a 30-year-old man. But by and large, we're coming out of this. Some states, sitting in South Australia, we haven't had a direct case in South Australia for a long time. Australia, I just mentioned there, opt out of turn, is sitting at number 2 on this same list. So where Brazil and India was, exactly those same demographics or same charts and measures, puts Australia at number 2. So if you ever think you're poor, think about this in context. Australia's number 2. Okay, interest rates were already low pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, we were already having a difficult time, and some would say we hadn't even got out of the GFC recovery fully. So it was already a difficult time for Australia. It's important to know. You will see headline figures about drops in unemployment of 10%. Again, we're Christians, let's not be scared. Let's rise up for this. Let's pray into this. Let's help our neighbours. But in actual fact, if you dig a bit deeper, there's a bigger situation. There's people that aren't unemployed. They are employed, but they're underemployed. They aren't working the hours that they would like to. So this chart here shows the dropping off of hours over a month per capita of average in Australia. So if you take everyone over 15 in Australia and work out that, yes, that might seem low. So don't worry about the actual hour figure, but look at the drop. It's lower than the 1980s recession, lower than the 1990s recession, much lower than the GFC. This is the real world situation. So not the first, we're a number of applications in. You need to be aware that this is fairly serious. It's important to take a positive mindset, but it's important to not be aware of some of this. Please be awake to this as a serious situation. Don't try to just say, it's tight, I'll hold on to exactly my strategy and just wait this out. For numbers of us, it's actually a time while we're sitting in isolation to take decisive action. Now, don't leave this seminar and said, Roger said to take decisive action and go and do crazy things. Seek God, seek professional advice, get into others of these seminars, get into tomorrow's seminars, talk with your pastors. Pastors are flat out at the moment, I know, but this might create a little bit of extra business out of this. But ultimately, it may be a time that you actually need to take decisive action. The government stimulus plan is in the over $250 billion so far. 130 of that billion was actually JobKeeper, which is now probably 70 billion because of the number of people that qualified and took it up. And then there might be more coming because this all might finish, they're saying it's September 24th. I don't think that's accurate now. I suggest that there will be some discussions around this. There's technically a buffer. I mean, it's not really a buffer of unspent money that wasn't available anyway, but there's technically some funds around that were theoretically earmarked for JobKeeper. So it's possible we'll see some staged approach, but let's take that as the icing of the cake, if you like. Now, some of us will absolutely need this. Others that are doing okay in this time, for whatever reason, maybe you work in a government sector or something, you're still employed, it looks fairly normal to some people in their worlds at the moment. Not many of us, but for some. Take this opportunity to take some action. Don't just think that we're returning to the good old days. I think that's slightly too optimistic. It's my job not to be super optimistic, so I'm happy for optimists. But I think the middle of the road is that there will be some sectors that take a while to recover. Some estimates are now going out, and Australia is doing some internal estimates at a government level going out to 2023, 2024. So some sectors will be impacted for a while. We need to restructure accordingly. If you thought you were living beyond your means going into this, have a bit of a think about what that means coming out of this. I don't think some of us will see it as the same as we are now, or were before this. Please hear what I'm saying here. If you thought you were overextended before, take a bit of a look at your situation now and do what you can, maybe to dial it back, simplify, go back to core. These principles are important. Now, there's a number of other government stimulus going on. Queensland government as well is committed to 6 billion forward estimates and things going. Use official websites, please, as you use this material. You don't want to end up asking your neighbour for advice because they heard something on the news. They might be a nice person, but please use government official sites when you're tracking about what you might qualify for. But be on the front foot and look at that. A number of people in Australia were out of necessity, and JobKeeper was taken up well. There was a few admin issues as it went, but it's brand new. It was never existed before. So look, I'll leave this slide out. This is just about the cost of the close versus staying open. It's largely semantics now because we did close. So we can have this argument, and we tend to, as economists, world that I deal with, have this argument, what did it cost to open, what did it cost to close? Happy to take as a question after if we really want, but the fact is we did close and now we're starting to open. Okay, so let's have a look at sector impact. If you're in the retail sector, which a number of you might be on this tonight, you've actually got twin headwinds going on at the moment. Please be aware of both of them. The retail sector, as a component of how much is spent compared with services, is this graph here. Now, services includes rent, utilities, health, purchasing vehicles, all of this sort of, the cost of living. So services is everything else almost. And you can see what's happened. Retail used to make up 50% of spending back in 1975, but that has been on a downward trend since that time. We're talking a 40-year downward trend. Sometimes if you look at graphs closely, as they normally do in retail, it's hard to spot the trend. Go back at a longer period and you can see that this has been a downward trend for a while. So there's twin headwinds. There's that going on in retail and COVID going on in retail. Online shopping is going on in retail. Without COVID, that's the trends there of number of people shopping online. You'd be aware of that. Classic case at the moment is Target being remapped. Why have I got Kmart on the board? Number of us would think that that's competitor, and it kind of is. Wesfarmers owns both. It's important in your sector to understand your sector. It's no point walking into Target, or even as an employee of Target, and thinking about how it affects, should I get a job at Kmart? Well, maybe. They do, there are separate businesses, I get that. But get the bigger picture of where retail is going. Have a think what it means for you. Have a think about long-term prospects. I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but this is a sector that was under impact beforehand. But here's a positive spin on this. Why not reinvent? Not go to a different structure. why not have a look about how you can work into retail? Remember, change equals opportunity. So some businesses are starting to change over to an online presence themselves. You have to be on the front foot of these things. What does it mean if I'm on a checkout and doing some work there? My daughter is in year 12 at the moment and is doing exactly that. What does it mean for her working in that as a part-time job in year 12 in the longer term? Is that her longer term trend? Is that where she works? Now, there's others that have been working in there a long time. What does it mean for you? What are long-term trends? How do I reinvent? How do I reskill? I don't know your answers to this individually because I don't know you all at the moment. We'd have to do a needs analysis, so this isn't personal advice, but take the time, take the hint out of this, but do it in a positive way. These times are changing. What does it mean to me? What are the opportunities? Get excited about it, please. I know it sounds a bit hard, and you might see I'm a bit cold on this, but they're the realities. So be positive and work through this. Seek God. He's got your back. He's CEO of your life. In share markets, if you came here tonight because you wanted a stock pick, that would be inappropriate, because even if there was a stock pick that was good for someone, it doesn't mean it's good for your neighbour, for you, and on this goes, because you have different risk profiles, different analysis. ASIC has come out with a warning about the volatility at the moment. I've just had an update come through from, you may not be able to see this, but where's my camera? Over this way, sorry. IG Markets, and they're saying about the economic impact at the moment and the volatility in the market. Volatility means opportunity as well, because volatility is movement. And if you go the right way with the movement, great. If you go the wrong way, it's a problem. If you're going to gamble, i.e. if you're going to invest in the share market without doing your homework, that in essence is gambling, because you haven't done your research. There's plenty of other institutions. I'm sure the church would be more than happy to take your well-earned dollars instead of you gambling on one side, to put it to the church, put it to great use, and to put it to your neighbour in a bigger world. So don't see this as a promo for buying shares if you're not educated, but perhaps it is an opportunity to educate yourself and to seek professionals, because there's been some big movements, there's been some big opportunities. This is exactly what was happening before that. There is a bit of history on. Now, times are never the same, and who knows what the future holds? God does. But you do need to put into a little bit of context, and the context would be, you can take some lessons out of the Great Depression for inspiration. Again, economists are going to shoot me down right now and say, it was different. Yes, but what can we learn from history? Some people say that we never learn from history. Well, let's learn a little bit from history this time. Be prepared to look at your goals and understand this. Don't just go diving into the share market. That's foolish. Do some educating, use experts. Maybe shares aren't for you. Maybe they are for you. Look at this graph, and I haven't put what I'm actually talking to this. So I've made this graph up of actual figures. So these are actual figures, but I'm not telling you stocks or sectors. You can see that in the last few weeks, that this graph I'm showing of the Great Depression, you might be able to correlate some of these thinking. Again, dangerous to suggest that, Roger, what am I doing? But the Great Depression is a time that we heard of massive impact, big problems, Australia as well. But in the Great Depression, as they worked their way out of it, there were some amazing stories. You might know a little old company called General Dynamics. General Dynamics, back in 1932, was part, or the electric boat company came out of this. So in the Great Depression, by the time that was called the end of that stage, if we run through to 1954, then it made 55,000% return. Don't go stock picking, please. But I'm just making the point, be encouraged, see the opportunities. Zenith Radio, 24,000% return. Boeing, which was Douglas Aircraft, which now moved into McDonnell Douglas, then Boeing, and so on. That's a sector that I used to live in. So it's a sector to be, that I'm not saying, it'd be a mistake to go out now and say, oh, you said Boeing recovered in that time, Roger, I'm going to go and buy Boeing stocks. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that there was amazing stories coming out of the Great Depression. Maybe that's behind my figure there, the Honeywell symbol. But maybe, as you see that bouncing toilet paper across the screen there, maybe it's an opportunity to remind yourself every time you see toilet paper that back in 1932, there was a company called Crown Zezerback It made 21,000% return, 21,403% return to 1954. So if you're a visual person, think toilet paper, because it's been short at the moment. And I'm not saying go and buy toilet paper stock. I'm just saying, look for the opportunities. Maybe God will put an opportunity in there. Don't look for good ideas, look for God ideas in this time. But some great wealth was made out of the Great Depression. There was also some missed opportunities. You see that line that went straight here on the graph? That's the number of banks back in the Great Depression. That went flat. That didn't fare so well. Missed opportunities. Kodak, we're aware of Kodak. Well, most of us are, if we're old enough. Some people on this call may not be aware of Kodak Smile and all these sayings. Kodak actually invented the digital camera. People say that Kodak disappeared because of the digital camera, which is actually partly true, because it didn't have anything to offer. It had passed its time. It was an old wineskin taking an old wine and it disappeared. But in 1975, Kodak actually invented the digital camera, the aperture for digital, but it didn't promote it. It was giving away cameras because it was thinking it was selling stock of the actual film, etc. So it didn't put much thought into digital camera world. Meanwhile, we've got a graph here as the uptake of digital cameras and then the uptake of mobile phones or cell phones in the US. They got left behind, missed opportunity, and yet they were the inventors of this in the first place. So another example is Blockbuster. Blockbuster, again, I might be showing my age slightly here, but most of us would be aware that we used to trundle down, it was an Australian tradition almost, fish and chip shops or otherwise, and grab a movie and go watch it on a VHS and then a DVD and so on. But did you know that Netflix approached Blockbuster? They said that they would like Blockbuster to buy Netflix. The CEO of Netflix asked to be bought for $50 million. That was the offer. Great history. Go check that out. I'm not saying that all penny dreadful stocks are winners. Definitely not. But there's also a time here of missed opportunities. So winners for last season don't mean winners going forward. What has worked for you last season, both in your skills, your style, your systems, your strategies, may have been a great blessing in the last season. How God funded your world might have been a great blessing in the last season. Don't assume that as we go into this new season, and that's what I want to propose, that this is actually a change in season. As we go into this new season, don't assume that how you invested, how you ran your money, how you did your job even will be the same and look the same. There's a lot changing. The fundamentals of some companies are changing significantly, and this will be accelerated changeover. I know that's a general concept, but it's going to be fairly true. It's unlikely that any sector will be impacted out the other side of this. It's important not to sit in isolation now and think, okay, we'll just wait to get out at the other side. I'm sorry if this is a wake-up time, but this is a useful time to reskill, to retool, to re-strategize. I'm not saying go and change your career or anything. So for some, it might be a time to change career. For others, it might be to look at our business and look at the core of our business. What is core? What can I outsource? What is working? Don't sit back in isolation. Think about video conferencing. Well, I'm sitting here on a Zoom platform at the moment. Did I have Zoom across all the platforms that I have now before this happened? No, I didn't. I mean, that would be a great, if we were all seeing each other's faces and put thumbs up and things like that and symbols on the line, it would be interesting at the end of this, Brian, to see who actually had Zoom across all the platforms that they currently use them for before this started. I reckon there'll be very few people that haven't added Zoom to something, to some part of their world. So video conferencing just generally, I'm not plugging Zoom specifically, the uptake of that is accelerated. They think that the uptake of electric vehicles, and with electric vehicles, don't just think Tesla, sports cars or things like this. That's actually a Porsche in the corner there, would you believe? For car buffs, they could get excited at this point now, sure. But don't just think in this space that electric cars just means this. It means trucks. It means self-driving technologies. Think wider about the acceleration of this opportunity that's coming out. So look for new future trends now. Don't just sit back. It's funny just on that. People talk about sitting back in COVID. The media makes it look like we're all sitting doing nothing. I've never been busier. And some of us I know are sitting back because they've lost their job. And that's a reality. But others, it's actually been a really busy time. I don't mean that you're necessarily earning dollars, but it's like busy. But if you have a space in this time and you have got space, use it wisely. If not, make space. Have a look at new future trends. Think about the impact. Don't assume. Please do not assume. If you get nothing out of this session tonight, don't assume that we're going back to the other side of the V curve and it's going to be exactly the same. Some things might be, but don't assume they will be. And most things probably won't be. Let's be positive, change our mindset. Impact, you can equate in this season to change. You can equate to this season as opportunity. Everything won't be worth going after, but look about the opportunity in Internet of Things, the acceleration of that, 5G, 4-day week. 4-day week's been talked about for a long time. In my world, 4-day week's been a discussion that we've had at various levels, and I get to talk with various groups that impact people's worlds, but hasn't really got traction. And now 4-day week is starting to hit the main media. What they're saying is the hourly rate increasing, so your pay is equivalent to what you would do in 5 for 4. Now that won't work for everyone on production lines of things because of output, but for some people, the output that they can do in the same amount of time, productive hours, and if you're paid the same, and you go to a 3-day weekend, that might be the new norm. Who knows? Some countries may adopt this. Australia may be looking at this. Retool. There's some places out there that have closed their factories and then realised that they might be able to retool, and they're putting out hand sanitizer right now. They're doing PPE. The Australian government spent $94 million in crude oil. If you're in any of these sectors, think about, can you get a piece of this action? Can you get into this world? Is this just a distraction, or is this something I can think about in my world? There's a demand for it. Okay, so we're about to hit wind up. We're in the last stages of these slides. We've looked at the world. We've looked at how the world impacts us. We've looked at regions which are impacting us. Some of those regional discussions, by the way, some of you may work in the mining sectors. Some of you may be on plantations. There's barley plantations in Queensland and South Australia, so both of where we are at the moment for most of you. This is relevant. Then we drill down and have a look at the Australia as a nation. What I'd like to do now is just have a 30-second plug of some information here that doesn't relate directly to me, and then dive straight into these last 20 minutes of this presentation. So everyone have a stretch, do what they need to do. Hi, Brian. Feel free to join in. Yeah. I've got a couple of thoughts in this time for an ad break, but please, you've heard me talking a lot at the moment. Please have a bit of a break, a leg stretch. And in this leg stretch, I might do a bit of an ad, if that's all right, Brian?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so this is my ad. Okay, I don't know whether you can hear this. Actually, can you hear jingling almost like Christmas bells? Some of you are visual. If you think about, I've got it in my hand now in the tiny picture in the corner. If you're on a big screen, you'll see this. If not, what I'm holding in my hand at the moment is a broken light globe. Light globes were amazing things that when they came out. Feel free not to listen to this, by the way, if you need a coffee. But I had to replace this, and it's interesting. When I went to replace it, I can't get a globe anymore, can I? You probably realise this. I've got an LED globe that replaces it. The lighting around you at the moment, so you can see me, is off this new globe in one of the areas. So if you're a visual person, we always say light bulb moment and all of these things. Well, light bulbs don't really even exist much anymore. Most of the light bulbs you've got at the moment are just casings around it with an LED component at the bottom. For all you tech heads out there, for all you people into technology, etc., you're aware of this. So for technology, think acceleration in this time. Think of opportunities. What does this mean? The other thing I wanted to say is, in this time, it may be a time for reading books, etc. I'm not sure whether this is inversed on your screen or the right way around, but there's some great books out there. And I want to encourage you to be salt and light in the world. And there's a book to do with all of what we're talking tonight is a book called Ecclesia. Ecclesia is talking about the church in the marketplace. And the church in the marketplace, Ed Silvoso has put this out. He's done a number of books, Anointed for Business, a whole heap of gear. So Ed Silvoso, Ecclesia. If you are a reader or you like to download and have it read to you electronically, sure. I'm almost caught between generations. So I still read books. Yes, everyone, this is a book. For those of you under 30, I still read those. I'm just being a bit silly now, but it's a point to realise that the Ed Silvoso's Ecclesia book might be a good read in this season. If you're out of books, that's a recommendation for you. So how are we going, Brian? Are you happy for me to flip back into these last few slides as we head towards 8:30 Queensland time?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, mate.
Great. Okay. So I'm just coming off screen view. I'll just have to throw that back up. 1 second, everyone. Sorry for everyone that's just getting used to my eccentric humour just now. It is a great picture, though, to think about. If you want a dream picture or a prayer picture at the moment, think of that one as the world to pray for at the moment. And look at the opportunity. They can see the mountains from that point. There's no smog in the way, or very little. Okay, Queensland as a state. Queensland as a state. And don't think that it has to get to your home in this discussion for it to apply. I'm showing you the world is impacting on you right now. You are in isolation and being impacted by the world because of a world event. The world impacts on you more and more anyway. It used to be in the past that Australia could look at Australia and how it goes, but it's so much a global player. Queensland, you guys are actually right down to a number of cases, nearly at zero. I understand that someone has died in their 30s just in the last day or two in Queensland, but largely you have now flattened off the number of new cases. So you're looking at coming out of isolation. So in isolation, I've just given you a heap of homework if you haven't started on the journey. Read the book, restructure business, think about debt levels, think about property, mortgages, a whole bunch of things. Please start thinking about this. Please start taking action on it. Be wise, seek God. Okay, maybe we start coming out of isolation soon and we start being able to move intrastate by September. Maybe it's earlier, but maybe it's not. How much of your business, how much is your employee as a student, how much does this world impact you if you can't go interstate till September? Property. Number of us are in property sector because we might be having a commercial building, or we might live in a house that we're trying to pay off, or we might be renting, or we might be any of these things. There's going to be an impact. I'll pause for just a second on this space. A number of us are now working from home and may continue to work from home. Some of us may not go back to an office. If we don't go back to an office, what happens to office properties? I'm not saying this is happening everywhere, but what happens to demand? Think about how it applies. Think about application to property. Think about if property prices go down, where does that leave your portfolio? If you're in retirement now, how does that affect if you've got investment properties? I'm not saying, oh, it looks bad, sell now. I am definitely not saying that. In fact, if there's any sort of recovery, why sell now unless you're actually pushed? Why sell now unless you have a personal reason? Now, there might be a valid reason to sell now, but if you're not in a hurry and you're only spooked and you're thinking of selling just because you're spooked, that may not be a very good strategy at all. Because we are talking about recoveries here. We're talking about the shapes of recoveries. It will look different, but unless you have to sell, again, not personal advice to you. I don't know your personal situation, but why would you sell now if you didn't have to? Time horizons change. Need to grab some knowledge. Think about your risk profile if you're moving into this world. You might think, why am I moving into this world? Well, some people could at the moment. Here's a very simple strategy to think about. Again, not rocket science, but again, we're not going to be able to cover property in a 1.5 hour workshop unless the whole workshop was on property. Come in tomorrow and have a think about, David tomorrow is going to be talking about what to do during and after COVID. I've talked a bit about that as well. And if there's some overlap, awesome. Please take the hint in the overlap. But here's a very simple, not even, I dare say, strategy. If you've got enough equity in your property and you're in a small property at the moment, let's say you're in a single unit. If you're in a single unit and let's say property prices drop 15%. I'm just throwing a figure in there. Then maybe at the bottom of the market, who knows where that is, might actually be the opportunity if you were looking at upscaling. This might be counterintuitive to how you're thinking, but let's have a look at this. Let's say you were in a $300,000 unit, and you were at a point that you were trying to look to expand. And maybe you still have your job at the moment, and I don't know the rest of your situation, but just hypothetically, if the market dropped by 15%, then your house now is worth $255,000. Now, if you still had equity in your property and to upsize, let's say you were looking at a property that was $900,000 before the drop. That property is now $765,000. So that's dropped by $135,000. Again, if you're in one of those houses right now and it's dropped, maybe you're not in a hurry to sell at the moment and just hold on and look for the recovery. It hasn't cost you right at this moment unless you sell. So think about that. But if you're overextended, have the conversation. May not be a good time to sell. Might be a bigger conversation. But let's talk really basic. All things being exempted of these things. Super simple. If 15% drop on a larger cost property is going to drop that more in dollar terms than 15% on a smaller property. So you can now buy that property having lost $45,000 of your property, thinking, oh my gosh, and buy a property that's now $135,000 cheaper, if you like. Now, perhaps property doesn't increase after that. I'm not saying it does. Enough caveats for now. You get the idea that it might actually be a good time to move up. Don't do the Roger said to expand in this time, but have a look at that if you were going to expand anyway and you're in the process of selling your house. If you are upscaling, it may not be such a bad thing for you at the moment. Education sector. It's an interesting spot. Let's do a very quick analysis of education sector. Let's have a look at two universities here. So here's some universities. They're relying heavily, more and more, on international students. And some of you I'm talking to tonight might be international students. If you have a look at this, you have a look at two unis there, Central Queensland University and the University of Queensland. They're the two high graphs. That's bar graph 1 and bar graph 5 on your screen. They're highly dependent. These unis are switching to off-site models. People are back at school now, I understand that. But have a look now, if we have a look at where they get their money from. The Central Queensland University has most of their money come in from teaching, like you'd expect. But the big winner in this, if you have a look at the University of Queensland, they've actually got a heap of income coming in from a whole bunch of other things. So that in their sector, the grey thing, sorry, it's not appearing on the screen. No, I'll go back. The grey line there, oops, apologise, let's just pop the screen. Give me 1 second. The grey line there on the University of Queensland is research. Others are other contracts, others are outsourcing, others are provision of servicing. You can see the diversification, and that's a key point here. If you can diversify and still stay amongst your knitting, as the saying goes, still stay in an area that you understand, but diversify across those, and it's still core business. Look at the strengths of the University of Queensland could have coming out of this compared with the University, Central Queensland University. So think about your own world, think about the sector that you're involved in, think about trends of where you work. Think about if you just got a job offer from the University of Queensland compared with some of the other universities. The whole ways that this can be valid right now. International student trends are set to go. At the other side of this, maybe the ones that were heavily skewed towards international students may outperform. Who knows? But just having a look at that, look at the diversification there already, and the strength in that. Education sector, TAFE was already having some struggles. It had some wage increases, but at the same time, it didn't have a corresponding increase by Queensland government support. So it was already going to budget. This was the budget pre-COVID, by the way. It was already budgeting that it was going to have a loss. So the green line there, tracking along as expenses, was under the blue line. That's what we want to see. But for the last 3 years, 2 years plus, it's changed over. The expenses are higher than revenue. So that's going to impact on future pay rises. It's no rocket science to talk about pay rises being difficult now, but they're already going to be difficult. So if you're a TAFE lecturer, big shout out to you guys in education, big fan, you might see this and find ways of applying it. But I could have done this shout out right now to all the other sectors. I mean, while I'm shouting out to educators, think if you're a developer or a builder, think if you're a retail worker around schools, think if you're a cleaner around schools, think if you're a gardener around schools or employed in this sector. It has this massive flow-on effect. The health in the TAFE sector isn't as strong as the uni sector. Please get to know your sector. It's not enough now for us to sit as employees. That actually in the past was okay because yesterday looked pretty much like today before COVID, but now tomorrow won't look like today. It just won't. So be aware of that and start thinking about how that matters to your world. Do some research. I mentioned Bali already. Bali is out researching their world and redoing it, having an analysis, getting professionals in, doing homework, researching. Always be a learner. I'm sorry if you're not a student at the moment, in the sense that you're going to have to be a student now. So I'm actually talking to 100% students at the moment. I'm believing that everyone I'm speaking to is a student. I'm sorry, but we're going to all have to go back to school as far as self-education. Some of us may actually have to go back to school, but I'm more saying we need to upskill, educate ourselves. So for Queensland and for Australia and from yourselves, look, there's a fair chance that you can look at this stage at a V-shaped recovery. They're putting some money into this and more money to come. So the idea is that there's a recovery that looks more like this. But remember, change accelerates adoption. So what might be 5 years in the past might be 6 months now. So there might actually be a chance for you to recover or do something new or to do what you were doing and implement it quicker. I need to get you dreaming, seeking God, finding some quiet time. Are you changing? Your customers are, your sector is, the world is. Do you need to retool? Do you need to rescope? Do you need to refocus what you're doing? I could have come here tonight and in normal years, it would have been very appropriate for me to go through a whole bunch of gear like I would normally and talk about individual you directly with your money in the bank account. Where does that go? And you'll hear some of this tomorrow in David's session. Please come in. But I felt it was super important. I felt God really laid on my heart to go in a different direction tonight. So I'm sorry if it's slightly different than you're expecting. And I don't mean to have go, ha, I've caught you, I got you. But I actually felt that this was a word in season for a number of people listening tonight, that God wanted you to hear that he loves you and he wanted you to take action and decisive action. And if you're wondering, should I do some research? I wonder if my sector, or if you're just sitting back now before thinking the sector's going to recover and it will look the same, we'll be back to work. For some of us, we won't be, or for some of us, work will be different. The whole world is changing at the moment. The whole region is changing at the moment. Take the chance to declutter your lives. Take the chance to upskill. Do you need to outsource or delete some non-core activities? Think about this. Roman roads in times of persecution were used 2,000 years ago. That's how Roman roads were utilised. The Romans built them for other purposes, but the gospel went up Roman roads. The printing press 500 years ago was invented and used for the distribution of the Bible. Today we're on digital roads. I could have done a whole session on digital gear, but that would have excluded so many people. But those people that think that not really in the digital world, start thinking digital world. Start thinking about how it works. You're here tonight because of a digital phenomena. Thinking about how you can put your message out in your business as an employee, as a student. Students have been living on this lately. You in business may have been. Think about what that means the other side of business. If you're an employer, do you want your people to come back to work? Maybe you want to. Do you want them to take a day or two on the side? They're not coming into work. Are they on a 4-day week? Something to look at. Maybe hold off on that until we hear from the government. But there's some things happening. Don't be left behind. You will need a new wineskin ready for this new wine that's coming. The blessing that was the massive, awesome blessing of God before now may not be the blessing going forward. New wine coming. Think about getting the new wineskin ready for that. Don't be someone to put heads in the sand. And some of you have seen this, and sorry, I just grabbed this because it was a great analogy. I'm not here to talk about climate change and all these things and the pros and cons of whether I believe it or don't. And there are big discussions in church circles. Please don't get distracted. But don't put your head in the sand on this and say, wow, that was a wake-up call, but too hard, I'm scared. Don't be scared. Seek God. Think about what it means. Look at this as an opportunity. Get a now word from God. Be one of the men and women of Issachar to know the times and what to do. Think about your neighbour. Think about Mumbai in India at the moment. Think about Brazil. One of the friends in the church that I go to here passed away this last week, husband of one of the key people in the church that one of the churches I operate in, operated out of Mumbai. This is real. Some of us may not know people directly that have died, but let's lean into this. Remember that picture that I put up before of the world. Lean into it, pray into it, see how you can help that world. Retool, reskill in some way. For some people, it may just be a little retooling, but it won't mean nothing. Please don't do no retooling or reskilling or assessment. See change as opportunity, but don't let this season pass you by. Please don't let it pass you by. And maybe you'll actually have the opportunity, instead of tracing the line around the bottom, maybe you'll be one of these people that has the opportunity that God gives this amazing word. You take decisive action and you come out of this with an amazing new concept. Who knows who we are, who we'll be. Thanks very much tonight for the opportunity to talk and share with everyone. I've been talking straight for an hour and a half. I apologise if you've heard my voice. I apologise if it's been hard for you on a small screen, but I pray that you've heard from God in this time. I pray that God doesn't leave you alone. How nasty am I? I pray that God is on your case and you hear his quiet tap on the shoulder, and he doesn't have to get a sledgehammer side effect for you to realise this. Perhaps tonight was your sledgehammer to go, okay, so maybe when we come out of this, it won't look the same. I do have to get busy. Maybe I have to seek some professional help. Maybe I have to go talk to accountants and financial planners and agents and people with skills in different things and advisors. Maybe, just maybe, I need to do this for the sake of my staff, for the sake of if I am a member of staff, if I'm a student. This is real, guys. This may even help some of you students if you're doing this as an assignment at the moment. If you're doing an assignment, a lot of assignments at school. My daughter's in year 12, as I said. She's interested in some of these notes afterwards. So see how we go through this process. But thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to everyone. And remember to come in tomorrow and stay around now for a Q&A where we'll have a bit of fun and chat through some things. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Roger. Some key points I think that you mentioned, that nothing will be the same. I think it's a key point that we need to get through our head, that a lot of things are going to change. We see signs of recovery, but it might not be the time is, only time will tell. Your key point about living within our means and looking at our debt situation, I think that's critical for those who are venturing in, and for those who are in, we need to reconsider a position. And I think the seeking God for the ideas and opportunities that are present now is key. And I think that for me, I got a good reason to play more golf now because I'm thinking about getting ideas. Okay, we'll wrap up there at this point. For those who want to join us in the Zoom room, it's iccbrisbane.org/Zoom. You can join us in there, or we'll be still live streaming the Q&A. If you just want to listen, you're welcome to as well. And just for tomorrow's, can we move to the next slide, Michael? Okay, so tomorrow we'll be having David Hodgson, or Dave, we call him. His group of companies currently manage $1 billion worth of assets. So he's got a wealth of experience in many sectors, and he'll be joining us tomorrow with looking at God's provisioning and what to do during and after COVID. So he'll come from a different angle. He has his thoughts. He has started a ministry as well. A very interesting character and background. So look forward to you joining us tomorrow morning at 9:30. thanks again for joining us today. If you have to go, thank you. Okay, shall we?
Thank you.
We'll just give a few minutes for those who are wanting to join the group, but I have a few questions that have come in already, Roger. So we can start that, just giving them a few minutes to come in.
Yeah.
We had quite a good turnout in the session. We had, I think, about 217 people at one point logging in. And that could be more than one. It could be families as well. So thanks for that. Good word. Okay. Okay, I'll start the ball rolling. Do you think that negative interest rates will be applied in Australia in the near future? And what is the impact of that, and what should we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this actually does come up a lot. Does everyone understand this principle of negative interest rates? Basically, some countries, even before COVID, went into this space. They went down the path that they kept on reducing interest rates, and their equivalent of reserve banks, if you like, started to take the view, okay, well, the economy's still not going. We'll just keep going, and let's follow this into negative. For those that are just joining us, we're talking about negative interest rates, the question. Look, it's an interesting one. It's been looked at in Australia, and by and large, the economist and the Treasury don't believe that, they don't feel at this stage that it's a good approach. They're not saying it's not needed in the sense of the normal process. Do we need to drop interest rates? And these sort of discussions, is there room? But they're leaving it at 0.25%, and that was very deliberate. The 0.25% discussion has gone on, and we're looking at places like Japan, etc., that explored this process for real and went into negative interest rates to try on. Now, there is speculation in the media at the moment, particularly in some columns like The Conversationist and other things like that you'll see in the media. They're discussing negative interest rates. By and large, Treasury isn't looking to go negative. They think it doesn't serve neither a fiscal or a monetary policy benefit to do that. In fact, they say that it complicates a number of the equations and calculations that go in behind the sector. So when you actually take an economy into negative, it actually produces error messages on a whole bunch of things that we use every day through the financial system. So there's a practical side that would need rebuilt. But the other practical side is, regardless of what you might hear, the general view at the moment, I would suggest in Treasury, etc., is not to go any further with interest rates and try other strategies.
Okay, thank you. This next question is, I guess, a particular scenario for someone, but please be aware that any advice given here by Roger, it can't be. Please go and check with your accountants and your lawyers and whatever. But we would like to hear your thoughts on it, Roger. The question is, if we are planning on doing development of units before COVID-19, this includes taking a business loan, is it safe and a good thing to continue right now? They were planning the development for units for rental. Do you think the rental market will be strong or weak in 9 months? Is it wise to take the business loan?
Okay, so this is a sector question, but as I answer it, think about how it might apply to your world. So the question was just posed about continuing developments. So look, the reality is we'll have to take a couple of assumptions here. Let's take a hypothetical development company and let's assume for a second that they have adequate cash flow at the moment because they have access to loans, or there is the opportunity to continue if they could. The government would want you to, from one answer. That won't be my answer fully at the moment, but the government would say if you employ people and can employ people, then you are automatically an essential service. And if you can provide that continuity, carry on. In fact, if you do carry on and you have certain arrangements in place and you can demonstrate, I'm not going to that now, but demonstrate that you qualify for JobKeeper, then you might be going through a time that the people that you do employ, you're now supported $1,500 per fortnight towards having them operate. Now, if you're a small developer and you're developing, let's say, a very small block of units, that would have to be a different percentage of your overall costs of cash flow going out. The ratios change as you get to bigger developments. Big developments have less percentage cost to employees generally, unless there's a hurried approach. So all things being equal, a lot of developers that have the ability to go ahead are taking the punt and continuing. Again, not personal advice, please be aware of that. But general principle is, yeah, developers are taking the opportunity and carrying on.
Okay, so I think, I mean, this one was more of a question from someone doing on a personal front, not a developer. So does that change?
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize.
Yeah, that's all right.
A shot at that too.
That's okay. You can have a second shot. Yeah.
Okay. So, so if you're a developer in that you're building your own place, sorry, not a developer in the sense. So, look, there's pros and cons to this. If you have a Torrens titled, I know this sounds technical, but if you have a Torrens titled property and you're building out on that one unit or maybe 3 or 4 and you're going to live in one and you're doing an owner-builder, owner-builders may be struggling a little bit because of the ratios of people on site to costs. So what would typically happen, and I don't know your scenario, but typically happen is what's called a drawdown loan. Every time you get to a certain stage of development, the bank will release the next stage of drawdown. So you've got to take a position at that point. Do I hold? Is there going to be more costs around it? Or do I keep going? Even in that scenario, again, don't know your personal situation, a number of people are carrying on because they're taking this view. I'm not saying this is my view, but they're taking this view. They're saying, is if I have people around at the moment and assuming I have access to materials, so let's say South Australia, there might be a backlog of materials because other people stop building, then I can actually do some great deals. And if I have room in my contract to go back and negotiate this, I would definitely lean into pressuring the renegotiation. So let's say if you're having a developer do it, you could go to them, not to make their life hard, but say, hey, I don't know, and you don't have to tell me if you qualify for JobKeeper and other benefits from the government. I have in my contract, because there's a major change, you might have a clause that says you're allowed to stop. However, maybe I stop, but if I don't, what could we sort out in this time to renegotiate? Is there some price benefits in this time? Now, those that have done that in the area that I am right at the moment have actually had significant cost benefits that they've gone and looked for first and then renegotiated. So look into it, but there may be some opportunity. If you have a contract that's locked in and does give you an out at the moment and doesn't force you to draw into a loan any deeper, interest rates may be low, but look for September and the impact if they're turned on after a payment holiday. If you're sitting on a payment holiday of 6 months at the moment, just be living carefully and putting some money aside, even if the bank isn't asking you from it. Please don't live beyond your means in these few months because that's going to look different right at the moment. So be very careful. If you can renegotiate, maybe you can carry on. If you can't renegotiate, maybe you pause.
Okay. Coming off the back of that, there's a school of thought now that says the position of rentals in the future, there'll be more people renting than buying. What is your thought? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a cool question, actually. Well, it's fun because I enjoy this sort of world. So there's a lot of new modelling going on, and I'm involved in some modelling work around the country. So look, different places are experiencing this differently, first of all. So I'll talk to Queensland because that's where you guys are. If I talk to South Australia, our residential property market is nice and stable, nice maybe, but it's, you know, not shooting the lights out or anything. So look, there is some thoughts around this. Just sorry, I just had a brain fade momentarily. Can you throw a question at me again, just to remind me of, and then I'll have this drink and then go back.
Sure. There's a school of thought saying that there'll be more renters than buyers, owner-occupiers. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, the suggestion is that if you have smaller rental properties, there may be a demand going on that curve. The larger rental properties are going to end up in a weird world. And this is why. If your rent is getting closer to a purchase, and the banks want to stimulate and the government wants to stimulate the economy, don't get caught out on this one. If you have a standalone property that's quite expensive, so let's say in my example, the 900,000 plus point, you may find that if you have that as a rental property, it may actually not be as attractive than it has been. The smaller properties are likely to be more attractive. The larger properties, if people are going to pay that extra in rent, they may have an opportunity, maybe, that they have enough support to consider buying. The majority of people won't be buying. I take that as a given. The majority of people will wait off before they're buying. Rental demand, by and large, will increase, but the subsector means probably single apartments, maybe 2 bedroom apartments, full-size houses, maybe not so much. But generally as a trend, smaller gear, yeah, could be very interesting times, maybe a lot of demand.
Yep. Okay, this is another question. With so much impact to the economy, with JobKeeper and JobSeeker and all that, do you think the current share market recovery is really a dead cat bounce?
Yeah, great question. So for those in that world, dead cat bounce is when you have a double peak. So those that are technical traders, what can happen in the market, it looks like it's rising, and there might be some fade off, and then it looks like it's rising again. And some people use that as the indicator. Once one line is above another, they're using the wrong indicators, and they see that as a buy signal and move in. But what it is, it comes up and forms another peak and drops back off. So you have that at the top. The dead cat bounce is at the bottom. It hits a bottom, it goes up again, and is it going to go down again and then come back up again? There is a massive danger, and we've already seen in a number of stocks them actually have a double bottom with no recovery at the moment. So what that means is people thought they were buying the bottom, it started rising, it started hitting a bottom again. And some of those stocks are generally used, and this is really hard to say now, they used to be used as indicators from other stocks that used to do maybe similar things but afterwards. So they're leading indicators. So we're already seeing some dead cat bounce in the good sense. Other times we're seeing a fade off. Is it going to be a recovery? And it hasn't been for some. They've actually gone back up, recovered. But then when you zoom out to another thing, instead of, some people trade minutes, some people trade hours, some people are in the long haul. And this is very much to do with education. But if you are skilled and educated around these points, then for those people I'm talking now, they are pegging a lot of market value in some fundamentals, even though they're technical traders. So technical traders normally don't look at fundamentals, they look at trends. They look at what's happening in stock picking and things like that. But even those guys are spending more time now when I go and talk, and I have access to the back ends of some of these large firms, let's say, and I won't divulge now. They are even starting to go and talk to their quant guys. They are walking down hallways that they haven't walked down in years, these technical traders, to go and ask about the fundamentals, because the price is so governed by the expectation of whether the money that's in the system by the government, the stimulus, is enough. And a few weeks ago, people were thinking, cool, we're out of this, we're going up, and they were buying in. And maybe they were right, but watch out for either a dead cat bounce on some stocks, yes, sure, recovery, because they're going to be coming out of isolation and the demand is going to go up. Sorry, I'm shouting a bit now. Definitely some opportunities on the market, sure. Be super careful. I'm talking to highly technical traders now. But some of those stocks that you thought were dead cat bounces, maybe reinterpret. And some of those stocks that look like they were coming out of this, they're starting to show some weakness and dropping back.
Okay. Another question, different angle. Withdrawing funds from super to pay down a mortgage in this COVID period, is that advisable?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a weird one in this sense, because a lot of my colleagues would say no, short-term gain, longer period, things like this. But let's say hypothetically that you had a fairly large, so let's say clients in the older bracket have built up a lot of super and taking out $10,000 when you're 54, about to retire, as a percentage of the impact it will have before you hit retirement, which can still be invested for growth, by the way, after that. The time horizon being short might be a great opportunity to pay down some personal debts with an early release. Caveat, caveat, caveat. Please go and get a full financial plan and everything. For those people, I'm a little bit on my own sometimes when I say that, but it actually might be a great opportunity. If you've got that last bit of lingering debt around, great. If you're the sort of person who's in the early stage, or you take that 10,000 out and you're going to spend it on expenses, here's a clever tip for you. I'm not saying it's clever because it's mine, because it isn't. This tip I saw the other day is pretend it's a balance sheet item. And most people go, what's a balance sheet item? Think about assets and liabilities. If you take away from your assets, maybe it's okay if you pay down a liability, but if you put it across into the expense column and start using it to try to get by, that's probably a mistake, actually. Don't take it out if you need it for expenses. Yes, if you're going to go bankrupt or something like this, sure. But generally speaking, it's not a great idea. And if you're a student right now and got a bit of super that's built up and you're allowed to access it, weirdly enough, it has the biggest impact when you're the youngest, because of compounding interest over time. If you take that out now, that's 10,000 or however much you're looking at taking out. That's less money that's compounding over time. Someone taking out $10,000 when they're 20 years old might be the equivalent of someone that same person when they were 65 may as well taking out $80,000 or $100,000. That's the call you're making on that $10,000. Yes, if you need to get out of jail free card, that might be it. But otherwise, leave it in at the other end of the spectrum. Or if you have a large super fund, government says you can take it out and pay some personal debt that might be higher interest rate, depending on your risk profile and how aggressive your super fund is working and all that gear. But maybe you plug that 10K out.
Okay, so I guess to summarize that, is you're saying that if you, it depends on the age bracket, and also if you look at it from a balance sheet perspective, as in a different class of asset, reducing one and increasing another, that should be fine. But yes, I agree with Roger. The compounding effect of super money is big if you are young. So do consider that strongly. And we also do not know where the property market will end up after all this as well, and when it's going to recover. Okay, on the property market, is it a good time to buy commercial property?
Okay, so again, I'm going to have to lead in, because if someone chops this out in isolation, what is a good time for someone, maybe a bad time for someone else, and maybe what you're looking at buying, it might be a bad time for individual stock. But look, let's just say, let's give me an out here and say, let's say you were someone that had lots of property already and you're looking at buying at the moment. Maybe you're not buying at the moment because maybe commercial property is at the point that you think the demand may not be there in that sector. Do your research, do your homework, go and talk to a financial planner, go and talk to an accountant as part of the process, get yourself super educated, but maybe they're coming back to you and saying that people aren't putting dollars there. But is it right for you? Well, imagine if you were actually after a particular property and now it's available after all this time. Do you have the fundamentals and everything work out? Maybe you can jump on it at a reduced price. But if you're just talking about your next commercial property or something like this for investment purposes, look, if it's for your factory, let's say that you're talking about buying a commercial property because you want to use it yourself directly and expanding your business. If you've got demand and supply for that, some companies are in expansion. I just came from a company yesterday that I'm working with over in West Adelaide, and they're in expansion mode. They didn't qualify for JobKeeper. They're still in expansion mode. They need more room for their offices. They've hit pause right at the moment, even though they could buy it, just because they're not sure of the demand and they're getting used to some people working from home. Some industries you can't work from home, but they're in expansionary mode because they've just seen the same property that they were looking at for quite some time start to drop off quite considerably, and maybe it makes sense for them with the cycle in their business.
Yeah, that's a good point you make about what's your purpose of purchase. If it's from an investment perspective, then you need to consider, even with people working from home, if it's an office space, you need to really consider you might not be able to rent it out. So there are quite a few factors to consider and what you exactly what you're looking at, I guess. This is more of a general question, but when you mentioned taking decisive actions, What are some examples of what decisive actions and what would decisive actions look like?
Yeah, this is going to become individual, but I'll give some examples. So some people, the reality is they found themselves stranded. They were already thinking maybe their career path wasn't for them. They might have had a word from God that maybe they should start looking, and they're taking this as a hint. So for them at that end, they're looking at reskilling, doing some education, some formal education around this, looking at some job opportunities in a different sector. That's an extreme version. For some of us, it just might be becoming more aware and educating ourselves of the sector that we're in. And it might be retooling our business so that we can take advantage of cheaper ways of doing things. We're sitting here on Zoom at the moment. Zoom at the moment is free. In time, it used to be 40 minutes when we used to use it pre this, but maybe it's a tool that can be used, and maybe that's a cheaper way of integrating something in your business. As an individual, you might be thinking, I've lived beyond my means in this time, and it would be better to retool a little. And if you've got some scope, and let's say you took that $10,000 out and you've already got it, but now don't really know what to do with it, maybe you pay off your home loan, maybe you do other things. Yeah, maybe you invest, but look, it's going to depend on your risk appetite and things. But what I'm really talking about is, if you think about a plumber turns up with a van and he's got some obvious tools of what his plumbing is. He knows his trade, he knows his tools. It's more of a metaphor for a lot of people when they think about, what are the tools of my trade? What are the tools of my existence? How do I run my world? Look at some of those big block things and say, actually, I don't need that anymore, or I can outsource it, or I can find a cheaper version, or I might have to retool and not be a plumber anymore, and now I'm a builder or something. I'm not saying that's a plumber. I'm just giving them the metaphorical example. So it can mean a lot of things, but what it doesn't mean is do nothing. Please, I don't want anyone doing nothing. I don't think this is an opportunity to do nothing. I don't think it's wise to do nothing in this time. And I don't think it's wise to think things will be the same at the other side of this. Don't see that as a negative, see that as an opportunity. Listen to God. God loves you. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Another question, another impact will be on our whole government taxation system. They will lose quite a few dollars on tax. Do you see any what plans they might have of levies or stuff like that, or other things they might throw in to make back that money?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. Remember that the inflows for Australia are on some levies that they have for the big industries and mining. They've got a lot of inflows coming in on company tax returns, and they've got income coming in from personal tax returns. Some of these sectors were already under pressure. There was already some scope in looking at how New Zealand actually works on personal tax returns, i.e. they don't generally require them unless you want to claim. Where brackets sit, you would notice that there's been a trend. Only a few years ago, I was doing a seminar like in this same spot a year ago or something, like you would have a year ago, I'm talking about many years ago, and we were talking about the first tax bracket being, $5,400. And immediately after that, you pay tax. So a lot of work has already been done in this space. It's starting to come out publicly, so I'm happy to say this, that there's some public information coming out from Treasury that they're indicating that they're doing some modelling and thinking about how to address this. But it's not for the same reasons that you might be thinking. You might be thinking, how do they address this so that the government can make up its money, its shortfall? Some of it's actually coming from the other side. It's saying, look, in the short term, if we even take a bigger hit, maybe that's necessary to stimulate the economy, because we would rather be getting someone employed and tax them in time than to tax small amounts now and that have a smaller base of employers. So you might see some reform coming in, but for different reasons than you initially think.
Yeah. Okay. Conscious of time, we'll take a couple more questions. What do you see the impact on government funding, in particular in the research space, for those who are being funded by research grants? Do you see a cutback there? Or do you see a shift of focus?
Yeah, cool question. Look, I'd suggest that those people, interesting study can be done right now, even though it sounds different. The government's totally restructured its foreign aid. if you guys, even though I know we're not talking foreign aid, go across to see how the government's remapping foreign aid, there's a lot of things that are relevant for you there. Foreign aid has been looked at of how it's paid, how much is paid, how much is going to be pulled in to make this work. Happy to talk more on this, but the short answer is, because you'll need to do homework on this anyway, research is a function. Well, first of all, research comes in as government funding, sure. Research also comes in, and there's government benefits as well, but research also comes in from the private sector. So it does depend on where you're getting your funding from at the moment, naturally. But as far as the government's concerned, so government funding side, take some time and have a look at how they're remodeling aid. Different world, but you can see the logic behind some of these thoughts. If you're being funded from the private sector, diversification is often key in this time. Great chance for whoever your marketing, PR, your personal development guys to go out there and track down some research. Remember, some sectors are actually going gangbusters at the moment. Yeah. Believe it, they're actually doing awesome. So if you re-scope your research a little and it's still on the core of what you wanted to research, but it allows you to capture other dollars that are close enough to where they want to put their dollars, there are actually opportunities. Sometimes slim pickings depending on your research, but there are opportunities. Maybe get a guy, start researching wider to pick up some dollars. Classic case is pharmaceutical companies and other things like that. They've got some money. They're happy to do some research, and if you're researching off a government base, maybe this is just an example, then the pharmaceutical space could get involved more than you think. And on this goes through all sorts of development, through to defence contracts, on and on. If your defence contracts from the government, think about how the scope could apply without creating an ethical problem for sensitive information.
Okay, I've just got 3 more questions and then we'll wrap up. So I've got those questions here. For those who are not financially savvy, I guess in the share market, is it a good idea to look at buying long-term holding of index ETFs in super for compound gains and significant portion of one's portfolio?
Okay, so 2 parts of that question are interesting because you're talking about a non-experienced person, but you might be indicating that they have a self-managed super fund. If that's the case, I'll defer away from that question to talk anything about self-managed super, and I apologise for that, but I'm happy to talk about the other implication of that. So if you're not acquainted with how superannuation works, but you're looking at a long-term strategy, the small amount of dollars, and this might sound like I'm pushing my own sector, but I'm not in that space, as Brian said, directly anymore. I sold my business, which was great wineskin for the season, but not future for me. So I made those changes. God brought me onto this 2 years ago, and now I'm not experiencing half these things, praise God. So God does talk to us. I'm a living testament of that world. But you will find the small amount of dollars comparably that you can put with someone in this space to work on this, either in a managed fund or your stockbroker or whoever, I would suggest is the way to go, because some sectors in the share market are doing terribly. Some sectors are doing okay. Maybe they'll keep going okay. It's a specialist field. Yes, I worked in that space. I wouldn't, but I'm leading because of the question being, if you're not that experienced. If you're not that experienced and you're not getting more experienced, I can certainly say the share market is not where you want to be at the moment. It's all over the shop. It's very volatile. ASIC is warning you to stay away if you're a retail investor. However, if you've got some dollars there that need to be reallocated, talk to someone that knows this space. It's very volatile. But absolutely, on the flip side, there's some amazing opportunities coming out of this. It's easy to get the stock pick wrong, individual stocks wrong, diversification, all these other things that a financial planner might talk about. But there's some amazing opportunities too, with the right person, with the right knowledge. There's some crazy opportunities. Be careful. Please be careful. Please stay away if you're not going to educate yourself.
Okay, last 2, Roger. You did mention the potential of a drop in property prices. I mean, I know the 15% of the figure up in the air, but in that scenario, someone's asked the question if they should take an additional mortgage where security might be uncertain and job loss might be in the horizon, and that's the main source of income. Sorry, you're muted. I can't hear you.
So sorry, in that you were saying that this was about taking an extra loan as well in this scenario?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll hear your thoughts. I got my view on it, but you...
Yeah. Look, it's dangerous times at the moment, potentially. Don't stop. Don't have this analysis paralysis. When you research into this world, some people's mentality is to shut down. But the general answer is people need to stay away from things they haven't done yet. They need to stay away from additional commitments. There may be times that you would look at this, but I'd suggest this is one of those 3 angel visitations lined up in the row that you know, and you've got certainty to do this. Because if, people are deleveraging. If China, who is still going gangbusters growing, is one of their core values, is deleveraging at the moment, reducing debt and things like this, I wouldn't normally say, take your lead from global economics like that in another country. But look, I don't mean to create doubt. Go and talk to someone. If you're hearing from God, great. God is God. He knows best. But make sure you definitely are, because if we're not, this is the sort of thing to hold off on any new commitments in this time.
Okay. And I think, on those thoughts, we were talking about living within your means. I mean, if you're uncertain about your employment, I think there wouldn't be a wise time to consider that. But I mean, I don't know your full scenario, I guess. So it's an individual decision. One last question, Roger. What are your thoughts on online selling products through places like Amazon, drop shipping?
Yeah, so online, look, there's various traps. There's whole pages on what to look out for, whether you're selling on eBay or Amazon or what have you, the different places. But there's a lot of activity on that. I've seen some figures showing Amazon space. It was either eBay or Amazon. I apologize for this as a stat or anything, but maybe moving by as much as 200-300% of volume of things that are happening, because people are deleveraging, they're decluttering, they're using this as an opportunity. If that's your world and you've got a trading site on it, change equals opportunity. So if you read this well, you can make a buck out of this. But again, it's a specialist area to work on. But by and large, if you are a specialist in this, have a look at the stats on this. There's a lot of volume happening in that space.
Okay, I think we'll end it there. You've been talking for 2 hours. Roger, once again, on behalf of ICC Leadership, we want to thank you for your time. I'm sure you did spend a lot of time in research as well, coming into this. So thank you for your time. It's much appreciated. And I think you've left some good tips for us and things to, I guess, you're looking for opportunities and change the way we're thinking and looking to God to give us those ideas, I guess, creative ideas. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 9:30 with Dave Hodgson.
My pleasure. God bless everyone.
Bye.